Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the Pain Over Joy tag. This tag was created by Jessica at Lady Lovestead Reads, and I was tagged by Brian from Bookish. I will link to both of their videos below. Question number 1 is, do you mostly read books illustrating pain or books illustrating joy? Why? I do tend to joke that a lot of my reading is very heavy on the war crimes. And I would say that the reason for that is because I think it's important to know what's happening in the world and to be aware of what people are going through. And I think if you don't have the context for that, I think you can't properly evaluate things that are happening in the world. So I think it's important to know about that. And joy is great. I think it's wonderful when you see laws that are empowering people or that are granting people additional rights. But I think a lot of times when we talk about global issues, it is more on the negative side, and I think it's important to be aware of that, just so that you know what is happening. And the more information you have, the more context you have, and I think that's really important. For example, I was reading Christina Lamb's Our Bodies, Their Battlefields, War Through the Lives of Women, which is primarily about rape as a war crime. And it's very general. It's clearly aimed at an audience who haven't followed a lot of world events. And reading that, I was frustrated because a lot of the summaries are not necessarily narrow, but they're so general because they're aimed at people who have no idea of the broader context. And there's certainly a place for that, but I think if you really want to understand what's happening around in the world and have the context of history, you have to read a little bit more broadly, which means you have to read more, which means you're reading a lot about pain. That's just how that works, unfortunately. Question number 2 is, do you see books about pain as more intellectually valuable? Why or why not? I don't think intellectually valuable is a useful way of judging whether you're reading something. I think there's definitely a point at which you have trauma overload and you're not going to read more about pain. I think specifically if you have just lived through something incredibly traumatic, it may be helpful for you to read more about that, or it may be healthier for you to avoid it completely. And I don't think evaluating it intellectually is useful at all, because I think that's incredibly dismissive of people's actual lives. I think Jessica was framing this more in terms of reading fiction, and the idea of literary fiction is more about people having affairs or living through trauma, and genre fiction is more uplifting, which honestly I don't think is necessarily true. I think you... I gotta say, my favorite subgenre in fantasy is grimdark, which is kind of unrelentingly grim, as it says on the tin. So I think that when people try to draw like an intellectual argument for or against one or the other, they're actually misunderstanding what popular fiction is doing, and I think erasing a lot of the hopefulness that can be found in quote-unquote literary fiction, even when it's dealing with topics that appear grim on the surface. So I don't think intellectual value is a useful way of looking at, of classifying this kind of thing. Question number 3 is, why do you think major book prizes like the Booker and the Pulitzer mainly award books about pain? I don't necessarily know that they do. I feel like a lot of the books that win awards are dealing with moderate trauma, or I feel like the books that really heavily deal with a lot of the really awful stuff don't necessarily win the awards. But at the same time, obviously, a lot of happily ever after type stories also don't win the awards, but I think it's more middle of the road. I don't think it is the blood, guts, and spinal cords that win the awards. I think it's in between. People suffered and then they stopped suffering, sometimes just because they died, but that is still an end to suffering, which I think is less grim than some pieces, so yeah. Question number 4 is, do you agree with the phrase guilty pleasure? Why or why not? I do use the phrase guilty pleasure, not because I'm ashamed of reading genre fiction. I have zero shame about reading media tie-in science fiction or romance novels with, you know, people showing off their shoulders. That would not be what I would call a guilty pleasure. I have no guilt about that. What I call guilty pleasures, and this is more often for television than for anything else, is I'll often engage with material that's essentially propaganda. If you make a movie about Napoleon Bonaparte or Mehmet the Conqueror, I will watch it, and most of these things kind of glorify that kind of conquest, and that is, you know, yay, conquest is not a great message, and I don't agree with that kind of nationalist imperialism. However, I'm very entertained by that kind of programming, especially. I like a good battle scene with period costumes, right? And horses. So I'm willing to engage with that for the elements that I like, even though I disagree with the political bent of it. So that is what I would call a guilty pleasure. I think there's a lot of military historical fiction that I engage with on that basis as well, and I call that a guilty pleasure, not because I'm ashamed to read something uplifting, because a lot of that is framing stuff that's not actually uplifting as something uplifting, because conquest, yay, is not actually a great message. So when I say it's a guilty pleasure, I feel guilty because I don't agree with the political message of what is essentially a pro-imperialist propaganda. But, that is... So, yes, I use guilty pleasure, but it's not because I'm embarrassed to read mysteries or romances. It's because I'm aware of the problems and the issues with some of the stuff that I'm willing to take as light entertainment, even though there is a propaganda element to it. Question number 5 is, do you think books centering joy are guilty pleasures? And no, I think propaganda is a guilty pleasure. Books centering joy can be fun. They're not always my thing, as I said. I tend to be all war crimes all the time. But, no. Question number 6 is, do you read in secret? Are there books you read but never talk about because of embarrassment, shame, or guilt in liking them? I think a lot of diet and exercise books are really complicated to talk about publicly, so I will often not talk about those on this channel, just because I think it is such a complicated topic, and it's hard to get into that. I mean, I do talk about sports books, but when it comes down to fitness specifically, it's such a touchy subject. So it's not that I'm ashamed to be reading them, but I'm aware that people are going to look at the fact that you're reading them and judge them. And especially as, I appear on camera and I have gained a lot of weight over the last year in lockdown, and especially since my dog died. You don't realize how much extra exercise you put in having a very active dog until you don't have a very active dog anymore. And it's like, well, it's raining today, so I'm not going to go walk 10 kilometers, but if I had the dog, I would have been. So, I mean, that's interesting, but I feel like as soon as you talk about that, it's hard to talk about yourself in relation to that kind of thing without making it feel like a judgment on other people, because I don't care what anybody else does, but if your pants don't fit, then maybe it's something you're thinking about. And by you, I mean me. And so, I do read stuff like that, and I don't particularly publicly read stuff like that. But again, it's not because I'm ashamed, it's because I don't want to, have to have the conversation about, yay, body positivity, but at the same time, I don't know. It's complicated. All right, question number 7 is, who do you tag? And I think this is designed for people who do read some fun stuff, so I would like to tag everybody who is co-hosting March Mystery Madness, because I know some of the people in there read almost exclusively cozy mysteries, which are very joyful, and some of them read almost exclusively pulp and noir, which do tend to be much more cynical about human nature. So I would love to see everybody there. I will link to everybody down below. Also, a couple of people who read both romance and also serious nonfiction, like Kazen from Always Doing, or Cynthia from Book Whimsy. I'd love to know what you guys think about this too, because I feel like the way this is written, it sounds like, you need to answer if you're reading literary fiction, but I think if you're reading a lot of genre fiction, or if you're reading a lot of nonfiction, it's more complicated, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, this was fun. Thanks to Brian for tagging me, and to Jessica for creating the tag. That's it for now. Ciao.